She thought it was just a decommissioned concrete husk, another Cold War relic lost to time and weeds. But when she stepped through the rusted steel blast doors of the old Air Force depot she bought for $1,200, she didn't just find storage tunnels and rusted bolts. She found pressure systems still live, security lights flickering to life, and in the far back, something no one expected to still be there. Something that had been waiting. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing stories from every corner of the world. And if tales of mystery, forgotten tech, and unexpected second chances spark something in you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story, it might just top this one. Claire Jensen wasn't looking for anything permanent. Her lease was up in 4 weeks. Her welding gigs had slowed to a trickle, and the engine hoist in her rented workshop had finally given up for good. She told herself she was just browsing, just killing time between cups of coffee and job board reloads. But then, somewhere between a dented camping trailer and a busted-out Winnebago shell, she saw a classified listing with a pixelated photo and the title, Decommissioned Military Facility, as IS. Buyer responsible for removal. No details, no contact number, just an address out in the plains and a price that didn't make sense. $1,200. She clicked, half out of boredom, half out of curiosity. The page had been up for 7 weeks. The photo was worse than useless concrete blocks, overgrown weeds, something that might have been a loading bay in the background. But it was the words at the bottom that stuck with her. Last used in 1990. 1. Fully sealed. No internal inspection done. Government cleared for sale. Sold as scrapland. Claire tilted back in her chair, stared at the ceiling of her crumbling workshop and thought, this has to be a scam. But something about it itched at her. She opened a new tab and searched the address. Nothing. No Google reviews. No satellite imagery. Just coordinates that dropped her on a stretch of unnamed dirt road cutting through the middle of Kansas. No towns nearby. No infrastructure. Just fields and a weird shape that might have been a hill or a buried something. The more she zoomed in, the stranger it felt. She called the number buried in the listing's footer. It rang 7 times before a woman picked up. Property Services Division, she said flatly. Claire cleared her throat. Hi. I'm calling about the depot for sale? The military one? A pause. Then, still available. You'll need to sign a liability release and handle your own access. We don't have keys, just bolt cutters and waiver forms. Another pause. No one's asked about it until now. Claire stared at the screen. It had been months since anything felt like a sign. But something about this, the mystery, the isolation, the absurdity of it all, it sparked something in her gut she hadn't felt in years. A dare, a challenge, a rusted lock on a forgotten door, daring her to see what was inside. She wired the payment that afternoon. No one called to confirm. No one even asked her name. 3 days later, a thin envelope arrived in her mailbox. Inside was a receipt with a government seal, a property transfer certificate, and one line in bold at the bottom. Property. Lot 7. C. Former USAF Site 104. B. Title transferred. No returns. No assistance. She held it in her hands, trying not to smile. Claire Jensen, a broke welder with nothing to lose, now owned an abandoned Cold War missile depot in the middle of Kansas, and she had no idea what was waiting beneath it. The morning she left, the sky was the color of wet concrete. Claire tossed the last of her gear into the back of her truck: crowbars, bolt cutters, gloves, a flashlight, and a half-charged drill. Not tools of renovation, not yet. Just tools of entry. She didn't know what she'd find, or if the place would even be standing. For all she knew, it was a sinkhole full of bad decisions. But when she checked her bank account, barely 4 digits left now, and looked around her empty garage, the decision felt right in her bones. Movement, even into the unknown, was better than stillness. The drive stretched across 3 states. She passed wheat fields that went on forever, rusted water towers looming over ghost towns, and diners with neon signs that buzzed even in daylight. Her GPS gave up somewhere past Salina. After that, it was just printed directions and blind faith. The deeper she drove into Kansas, the fewer power lines she saw. No billboards, no houses, just land. At one point, she slowed to watch a coyote cross the road with something limp in its mouth. It paused, glanced at her with amber eyes, and disappeared into the grass like smoke. The road got bumpier after that, cracked with frost heaves and lined with tumbleweeds that thudded softly against her grill. The address led her past a gate with no signage, just 2 bent steel poles and a narrow gravel track. Her tires crunched forward slowly. Dust rose behind her in thick curtains. On either side of the road, long grassy berms rose like shoulders too symmetrical to be natural. She passed a rusted sign leaning sideways, its paint flaked beyond recognition. The place felt folded away, like the land was trying to forget it had ever been touched. When she finally pulled up to the gate, her headlights hit a shape that made her stomach lurch. The structure was half sunk into the slope, built like a brutalist scar-thick concrete, blackened steel doors, and above them, faint block letters etched into the facade. AP Fear Eonk. Most of the letters were chipped or faded. Weeds burst from the cracks in the concrete pad, and moss lined the corners of the structure like a creeping warning. Claire parked and killed the engine. Silence dropped like a hammer. No birds, no wind, just her truck, and a facility that hadn't seen human eyes in decades. She grabbed her bolt cutters from the passenger seat and approached the main entry. The steel cable across the doors snapped under pressure, brittle with rust. The blast doors were cracked open just an inch, just enough to make you wonder if they'd ever truly been sealed. She paused with her hand on the door. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew this was the moment, the point of no return. With a grunt, she pushed the doors inward, and the depot exhaled. The air that hit her face was colder than she expected, stale, but sharp, like something preserved in metal and time. Claire stood just inside the threshold, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dark. The last sliver of daylight filtered through the open blast doors behind her, carving long shadows across the concrete floor. Ahead of her, the depot stretched out like the throat of some sleeping beast, a long, wide corridor lined with corrugated steel ribs and industrial rails embedded in the ground. She stepped forward, each bootfall echoing down the hallway like a challenge. Her flashlight flicked on with a dull click, casting a cone of pale yellow over flaking paint and rusted warning signs. Authorized personnel only. Negative pressure zone do not breach. Some of the stencils were still legible. Others had faded into ghosts. The deeper she went, the less the outside world seemed to exist. No cell signal, no noise, just the occasional drip of condensation and the creak of metal expanding in the cold. Claire ran her fingers along the wall as she walked. It was smooth in places, jagged in others, and every so often, her light would catch on something unexpected. A scuff mark, a cracked switch panel, a single boot print long fossilized in dust. She passed the remains of what might have once been a decontamination chamber, the rusted outline of a circular frame, bolts still locked in place, hoses dangling like vines. Beyond it, a metal locker lay on its side, its door bent outward. Inside, she saw a yellowed folder, its pages stuck together, the ink blurred into oblivion. She left it. Whatever this place had been, it wasn't ready to give up its story so easily. Then, a sound, soft, mechanical. Claire froze. Listened. It was barely more than a whisper. A faint, metallic tick, 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 like a gear winding down, or a pressure valve bleeding off air. She swept her light toward the far end of the corridor, heart thudding. Nothing moved. But the sound was real, not imagined, not wind. She followed it, slowly, past an old intercom box and what looked like a long-dead control terminal bolted into the wall. The ticking grew louder, not rhythmic, but persistent, like something reacting to her presence. Finally, the hallway opened into a large room, a control center maybe. Panels lined every wall, gauges long shattered, buttons missing their caps. But one panel near the back, under a half-collapsed junction box, still blinked. A single green light, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, just above the words, "Status. Standby." Claire stepped closer, instinctively reaching for the light. Her fingers hovered, but she didn't touch it. Not yet. The air felt heavier here, charged. Behind her, the corridor groaned as steel shifted against steel. This place wasn't dead. It was sleeping. Claire crouched beside the blinking light, her breath fogging in the cold. She half expected it to stop some faulty capacitor giving up the ghost. But it kept pulsing, steady and unbothered, like it had been waiting patiently for someone to notice. She looked around the control room. Dust coated everything like a second skin, but under it, there was structure, purpose. This hadn't been a storage unit. It had been a brain. On the far wall, a bank of switches stretched 12 feet across each, labeled with stenciled text now barely readable. She brushed one off. Main power grid zone 1. Another, surge override. Her hand hovered over a row of black levers, unsure whether throwing them would light up the past or kill what was left of it. She didn't have a map. No schematics. Just a gut feeling and a toolbox back in the truck. She picked the most worn switch, its paint rubbed to bare metal, and flipped it. Nothing. Then a soft thunk somewhere in the ceiling, and another. Lower. Suddenly, the overhead lights crackled. Not all of them, maybe 1 in 4, but enough to bathe the room in fractured beams of white. Claire stood slowly, watching as a strip of lights stuttered down the corridor behind her like falling dominoes. The depot groaned again, louder this time, as if stretching awake. The hum came next. Deep, resonant, and low like an industrial heartbeat far beneath the floor. Claire felt it through her boots before she heard it. Some kind of generator system, still alive. She scanned the control panel again and noticed a covered toggle switch tucked under a cracked plexiglass shield. She popped it open with the edge of her knife and revealed the label underneath. Interior Environment Systems. Manual start. Without thinking too hard, she flipped it. Vents along the ceiling hissed. Cold, dry air rushed through the ducts. And then, unbelievably, one of the corner monitors flickered to life. The screen warped and rolled, the image twitchy and half obscured by static, but unmistakably live. It was a feed of the lower levels. A dark concrete hallway, pipes running overhead, a red stripe along the floor, and at the far end, a sealed door with yellow stenciling across it. Vault, 3B. Claire stepped closer to the monitor. The camera panned slowly on its own, left to right, as if following some dormant protocol. Then it paused, and the image sharpened. A soft glow pulsed beneath the door. Not bright, but real. She whispered, "No way," before she could stop herself. She wasn't alone down here. Not really. The system still had power. The cameras were still watching, and at least one vault door was still sealed tight from the inside. She backed away from the console slowly, the glow of the screen casting her shadow long behind her. Something in this facility was still running, and it had just noticed her. The next morning, Claire returned with a thermos of coffee. A roll of duct tape looped over her arm, and her nerves tightened like bolts. She'd slept in the truck, wrapped in a thermal blanket, the depot's massive silhouette looming in her mirrors all night like a dormant predator. She hadn't dreamed. Or if she had, her memory had sealed the images away, the way old military doors sealed what wasn't meant to be revisited. She stepped back inside, now with the authority of someone who had already crossed the line. The depot greeted her with the same groan of settling steel and the faint hum of machinery still alive beneath the surface. The switchboard remained lit, like it had waited through the night for her to return. She followed the red-striped corridor she'd seen on the camera feed. The stripe had faded with time, cracked like old blood along the concrete. Pipes hugged the ceiling, many of them marked with color-coded tape and acronyms that meant nothing to her. Some bled rust. Others dripped something clear and cold. She ducked beneath them, walking slowly, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. At the far end of the corridor, Vault 3B waited. The door was built like something meant to withstand war, not just an explosion, but an apocalypse. 8 feet tall, 10 inches thick, a steel wheel at its center. Yellow stenciling marked it. Vault 3B pressure, sealed authorized personnel only. Below that, in red, engage override before entry. Claire stepped closer and pressed her palm to the surface. It was cool, unnervingly so. She ran her hand along the seam, then crouched beside the base. A keypad was bolted into the wall beside it, the buttons worn and slightly corroded, but intact. Below it, a small slot maybe for a keycard, and beside that, a faded sticker peeling at the corners. Property of USA. Do not remove. Do not tamper. She stood up, looked at the control panel again. No keycard, no obvious handle, but a small green LED next to the pad still blinked. The system still had power. Claire leaned in, peering into the ventilation above the vault. A soft hum resonated through the metal, deep, rhythmic, like a breath being drawn again and again. It reminded her of the service tunnels in a nuclear plant she'd once worked near. Years ago, places that had long stopped launching, but never really shut down. She spotted something strange. Just above the door frame, the concrete bore a set of hairline cracks that stretched outward in a perfect arc. As if, at some point, something behind the door had pushed. Or pulled. She stepped back, heart thudding in her chest, and asked herself the question she hadn't dared form until now. What if this door wasn't just sealed to keep people out, but to keep something in? She didn't try to open Vault 3B. Not yet. Not without understanding more. Claire retraced her steps through the humming corridor, flashlight beam catching on exposed wiring, and conduits marked with military codes she couldn't decipher. Her boots echoed again, softer this time, as if the depot had grown accustomed to her presence. She passed the switchboard, still humming, and turned down a narrow offshoot hallway she hadn't noticed before. At the end, a rusted steel door hung slightly ajar. She nudged it open with the toe of her boot. It was a war room, or what was left of one. Concrete walls, a low ceiling stained with water damage, and a long, curved table bolted to the floor. Above it, the remains of a mural-sized operations map covered nearly the entire wall. The paper had yellowed, curling at the corners, but the ink still held military precision, unbothered by time. Claire stepped closer, brushing away cobwebs. It wasn't just Kansas. The map covered the entire continental United States, broken into sectors, grids, and color-coded zones. Along the edges, faded legends explained acronyms that made her blood run cold. Response Trajectory Pathing, ICBM Staging, Launch Corridor Verification. A Cold War command center, silent for decades, still frozen in preparation. But that wasn't the part that stopped her cold. It was the lights. Small red LEDs were embedded into the map at key points across the country. Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska, Texas, and right here, in the middle of Kansas. All of them were dark, except one. Claire leaned in. Just to the left of the word Selena, a light blinked. Faint. Rhythmic. Right over the coordinates of Site 104B, her site. She reached up, instinctively brushing her fingers against it, as if touching it might stop the pulse. It didn't. The light kept blinking, stubborn and patient, like a heartbeat that refused to quit. She followed a line from that blinking dot downward to a label in tiny print. Vault 3B. Containment Sector Emergency Override Authority. Manual only. Beside it was a name, etched into a metal plate half rusted over. Custodian, Lieutenant R. Alston. She read it again. The name meant nothing. Not yet. But it wasn't the name that rattled her. It was the word custodian, not commander, Not technician, custodian. As if the person responsible wasn't meant to control anything, just to guard it, maintain it, wait. Claire's throat felt dry. She stepped back and looked around the room. On the floor near the map's base, she spotted a filing cabinet, toppled sideways. Most drawers were empty or water-damaged beyond recognition. But in the bottom drawer, jammed beneath rusted metal, she found a single sealed envelope, thick, yellowed, and across the front, in block letters, to be opened by final custodian only. Claire stared at it, heart hammering. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't trained for this, but for reasons she couldn't explain. Reasons that made no sense at all. She felt certain of one thing: that envelope was meant for her. She didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Claire placed it carefully in her satchel, the weight of it somehow disproportionate, not heavy in grams, but in meaning. She didn't know what she expected to find inside. Access codes? A warning? A confession? Maybe all of the above, but something in her gut told her she needed to see Vault 3B again before she read a single word. When she returned to the control center, she noticed it immediately. One of the secondary monitors had changed. It was no longer static. Now, the feed from the Vault 3B hallway was clearer, less static, sharper contrast. The camera panned left, then right, and then it stopped, locked on the sealed door. Just above it, a digital overlay appeared on screen, flickering in green text. Internal temp, 42.1 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure, active. Heat signature, detected. Claire felt her skin prickle. She stepped closer to the screen, reading the data again, slower this time. The vault wasn't just powered, it was warm. She moved quickly now, adrenaline overriding logic. Back through the corridor, down past the piping and yellowed signs, back to the pressure-sealed door of Vault 3B. The blinking keypad was still lit. The keypad waited, blank and quiet, as if indifferent to the information now humming behind it. She crouched beside the panel again, tracing the outline of the keycard slot. It wasn't just for access, it was tied to a full environmental override. That much was clear now. There were wires branching out from it, into the wall itself. Old-school hard connections, the kind that didn't rely on wireless protocols or cloud permissions. The kind built to withstand EMPs and nuclear fallout. Everything about this place screamed permanence. She stood and took a step back, bracing herself. She could feel the air here warmer, denser, as if the vault were breathing ever so slightly. No sound, just presence. Not like a machine left running, like something waiting behind that door, like heat from a kiln, with no visible fire. She didn't say it aloud, but she felt it deep in her spine. There's something alive in there. She opened her satchel and pulled out the envelope. The paper crackled as she unfolded the flap. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead stamped with a USAF insignia, typed, dated August 1991, asterisk, to the final custodian. In the event of protocol decay and staff deactivation, this vault must remain sealed unless 3 specific conditions are met. Environmental containment must remain intact. Exterior breach sensors must remain dormant. Heat signature within remains stable at or below 45 degrees Celsius. If all conditions are met, and you are reading this, proceed to manual override protocol in Section Delta. You are now responsible. You are not to contact command. Command is no longer active. Asterisk. No signature. No name. Just a final line, handwritten at the bottom in red ink. If the heat rises, walk away. Don't try to finish what we couldn't. Claire folded the paper with trembling hands. She was already too deep, but she didn't walk away. The airlock hissed before it opened, not a dramatic movie hiss, but a tired, mechanical wheeze like a machine, exhaling after years of silence. Claire had found the manual override hatch behind a rusted utility panel marked Section Delta near the vault. 3 bolts, a snapped handle, and a hand crank connected to the door's pressure system. She didn't know if it would work, but when she turned it, the vault shuddered, not resisting, but responding. Now, the wheel on Vault 3B turned slowly beneath her grip. Each rotation let out a groan that echoed through the corridor, steel rubbing against steel. The final click rang out like a gunshot. Claire took a step back. The door didn't swing open. It released like it had been holding its breath. She pushed it open with both hands. Inside, the air was hot. Not unbearable, but distinctly warmer than the rest of the depot, and laced with a faint chemical tang. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing a cavernous chamber that dropped nearly 2 stories below her. She stood on a grated catwalk, overlooking a space unlike anything she'd ever seen outside of textbooks or conspiracy theories. The walls were cylindrical, lined with access ladders and rusted metal panels. Support beams crisscrossed the interior like a rib cage, and at the very center, rising from the pit like a tower of forgotten threat, was the missile. Intact, unfired, standing as tall as a 2-story house, the surface dull with age but eerily pristine. Its nose cone pointed upward, just below a reinforced ceiling hatch that, by the looks of it, had never been opened. There were no markings, no visible serial numbers or flags, just a black identification plate near the base. MX-79, Lancer Silo 3B, final loadout. Status: decommissioned, pending. Pending, Claire stared, pulse pounding. This wasn't a mock-up, not a shell left for training. This was real, a Cold War relic that never got deactivated, or worse, one that was meant to stay ready. She descended the ladder slowly, boots clanging against the rungs, the heat intensifying as she reached the silo floor. The moment her feet hit the bottom, she noticed something else. A console, still powered, still glowing. It stood on a low platform, connected by cable to the missile base, flat green screen, outdated keyboard. Switches she couldn't begin to interpret. Most were dark. One wasn't. A red toggle labeled ARM, divided by safe, its position firmly flipped to safe. Claire's hands trembled as she backed away. The silence down here wasn't like upstairs. It felt alert, like something was watching, even if it wasn't alive in the way people were. This silo hadn't been abandoned. It had been preserved. She looked up at the missile again, the cone catching her flashlight just enough to gleam. Whatever this was, whatever the government had left here, they had planned for it to wait. Claire stayed in the silo longer than she should have, not because she was gathering data or running tests, but because she couldn't stop staring at the console, at the missile, at the idea that something this massive, this dangerous, had been left here. Not forgotten, left. Like a last chess piece the world had turned its back on. And now, somehow, it was hers. She circled the base slowly, flashlight in one hand, trying to make sense of the cables and conduits laced into the silo walls. Everything was hardwired. No Wi-Fi, no digital ports, but they had to have logged something, stored something. Even if this site had been disconnected from the outside world, someone had to have tracked its condition, monitored it, managed it. The systems upstairs hadn't booted themselves. She noticed a maintenance panel near the back of the platform slightly ajar, one screw rusted halfway out, as if someone had been in a hurry. Claire knelt beside it, working her gloved fingers into the gap and pulling. The panel creaked open, revealing a tangle of wires and 2 small cooling fans still spinning in lazy circles. And tucked behind them, almost hidden, was a small object wrapped in black electrical tape. Her pulse jumped. She reached in, gently pried it loose. It was a flash drive. Old, maybe 20 years. The casing was matte black and scratched to hell, but legible. A faded white label across the side read, in neat block print, "Final sequence, cancelled." Claire sat down hard on the grated floor. The metal was hot beneath her, and the air pressed in close, like the vault didn't want this moment to last. She turned the drive over in her hand. No date, no logo, just that label. Final sequence. Cancelled. She didn't have a laptop with her. Not in here. But she knew better than to plug this into just anything. This was data, not just history. Evidence, maybe. A record of something scrubbed from paper trails and official channels. Someone had labeled this deliberately. Left it here, for a reason. Or maybe they'd hidden it, thinking no one would come looking. Claire stood again, tucking the flash drive into the inner pocket of her jacket, next to the custodian envelope. The weight of both made her breath hitch. She climbed back up the ladder slowly, one hand on the rungs, the other pressed against her chest, as if trying to keep everything inside her from spilling out all at once. Before she left the vault, she looked back one last time. The missile stood silent. But the room felt changed now, less like a tomb, more like a room with one breath left in it. And somewhere, on that flash drive, was the reason no one had ever come back. Claire had barely finished pulling the depot doors shut when she noticed the dust cloud on the horizon. It was faint at first, a shimmering blur at the edge of the wheat field, just where the gravel road curved in from the east. She squinted against the setting sun, shielding her eyes as the shape came into focus. A government-issue truck. Boxy. Tan. The kind built for field work, not comfort. It crawled forward slowly, deliberately, as if its driver already knew where it was going. Claire's first instinct was to duck behind her own truck, but she didn't. She stood her ground, hand resting on the handle of her crowbar, heart beating hard against her ribs. The truck stopped 10 yards away. The driver's door creaked open. A man stepped out. Maybe mid-50s, tall, lean. He wore civilian clothes, cargo pants, dark shirt, and a cap pulled low, but there was a rigidity in the way he moved. Military, or ex-military. His boots were too clean for the terrain, and his eyes didn't linger on her. They went straight to the concrete bulkhead behind her. He didn't say anything right away. Neither did Claire. Finally, he spoke. "You've been inside." Not a question. A statement. Calm. Unapologetic. Claire straightened. "It's mine. I bought it legally. Transfer went through." The man nodded slowly. "I know. We let it happen." That stopped her cold. "We?" she asked. He walked forward a few paces, stopping at the depot's edge. His eyes scanned the blast doors, the broken seal, the faint scuff marks left by her boots. "You were never supposed to open Vault 3B. Claire's mouth went dry. She didn't confirm or deny, just watched him. "You found the silo," he said. Again, not a question. "I found a lot more than that," she replied carefully. He finally looked at her. "Did you take anything?" She paused. Define take. A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not amusement, but recognition. "You've got the flash drive." She didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated ID. He didn't hand it to her, just let her see the logo. Department of Energy Strategic Materials Oversight Division. "You're not military," she said. "No. I'm something older." He turned, resting one hand lightly on the hood of her truck. That site was scheduled for full neutralization in 1992. Funding got pulled after the USSR collapsed. Technically, the silo is decommissioned. "Technically?" Claire echoed. He nodded toward the vault. "But that missile's still hot. Not armed, not functional, in the traditional sense. But that's not what worries me." Claire folded her arms. "Then what does?" He looked back at her, expression unreadable. That silo was never just about launch. It was about containment. Claire's stomach turned. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There's something on that drive that explains what Vault 3B really was. But if you open it, you're going to have to decide what kind of person you are." Then he turned and walked back to his truck without another word. He didn't come back. Claire waited, watching the taillights of his government truck disappear into the tall grass, a faint ribbon of dust trailing behind until the dusk swallowed him whole. She stood there long after he was gone, pulse still drumming in her ears. The silence returned like a lid sealing shut. The depot's doors loomed behind her, still cracked open, as if inviting her back in. But she didn't move. Not yet. She slept in the truck again that night, but sleep came in pieces. Every time her eyes closed, her brain replayed the man's words. Containment. Not functional. You're going to have to decide what kind of person you are. At dawn, she sat in the passenger seat, knees tucked under her, flash drive in hand. She'd rigged a solar battery to her old laptop, barely alive, held together by electrical tape and prayer. When the system finally booted, she plugged in the drive, half expecting it to fry the motherboard or trigger something worse. But it didn't. Just a single folder. MX79 divided by Project Harrow. She clicked. Inside, logs, diagrams, dated PDFs, and one encrypted video file marked, "Do not play archive only." Claire opened the documents first. They were all dated between 1987 and 1991. She skimmed page after page, the words growing darker, more surreal. This wasn't a standard missile program. Vault 3B had never been meant to launch anything. The silo had been retrofitted from an abandoned Atlas ICBM site, part of a secret directive under an experimental division of strategic defense. Not to deploy weapons, but to study them. Specifically, the long-term effects of containment on unstable warhead materials, recovered from decommissioned enemy stockpiles, experimental alloys, volatile compounds, unknown decay patterns. Claire scrolled faster. They'd stored something inside Vault 3B. Not a missile, or not only a missile, but a test payload nicknamed Harrow. The file didn't define what Harrow was exactly, only that it was non-replicable, reactive under psychological stress indicators, and requires permanent negative pressure stasis. Over and over again, the same word appeared in the logs, unpredictable. The most recent entry, dated August 15th, 1991, was only 3 lines long. Final personnel withdrawn. Vault remains sealed. Environmental conditions stable. Custodian protocol activated. If reading this, containment is your responsibility now. Claire sat frozen, the cursor blinking at the bottom of the screen. Not just a missile. Not just a silo. A vault for something unstable, maybe even alive in a way no one understood. And now, it was hers. She looked toward the depot entrance, her thoughts racing. How had this stayed quiet for so long? Why hadn't the government destroyed it outright? Why was that light on the map still blinking? And why had they let someone like her, a mechanic with a welding license and a debt-ridden past, walk into something so deep? Unless that was the point. Unless the silence was the plan. She opened the video file, and everything changed. The video file opened to black. No audio, no lead-in, just darkness for 7 full seconds, and then static. A flicker. And suddenly, the screen showed a camera feed from inside Vault 3B. It was grainier than the live feed Claire had seen on the depot console. This one looked old, time-stamped. The 14th of August, 1990. 4 hours, 27 minutes, and 3 seconds. The vault door was sealed. No movement. Just the low hum of machinery in the background and the distant whir of fans keeping the negative pressure stable. Then, a voice. Male. Calm. Tired. "This is Lieutenant Robert Alston, final custodian of Site 104B, Vault 3B. Time, 427 hours. Last transmission from command received 12 hours ago. Order, full personnel withdrawal, site to remain sealed until further notice." A beat. His face appeared in the frame, gaunt, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked young, maybe late 30s, but worn like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. He kept his gaze on the camera. "I have completed vault lockdown. Power remains stable. All systems in safe state. Harrow payload has shown no further thermal surges since Tuesday. However," he hesitated, "there's been a change." Claire leaned in, breath held. At 03:19, the auto safety relays initiated a soft countdown. It's not the launch system, it's deeper. Embedded. A maintenance subroutine. I've tried to cancel it. Terminal access denied, which means it was never meant to be stopped. He reached for something off-screen, a clipboard, and held up a handwritten countdown. 71 hours, 42 minutes. It's not labeled, not tied to any external sequence. My best guess? If no human intervention occurs, before the timer hits 0, containment protocols will shut down on their own. Claire froze. Autonomous failure. A system designed not to hold, but to expire. On screen, Alston's expression changed, something breaking through the stoicism. Not panic, not even fear, just fatigue. Like a man who'd waited too long for orders that never came. If anyone ever sees this, I don't know if the payload is decaying, evolving, or listening, but I swear since they left I've heard things. Not machines, not animals, breathing. Sometimes it's mine. Sometimes I don't think it is. The screen flickered. Audio distortion bled into the edges of his voice. I've locked the override behind panel Delta. Code is handwritten. Final step. If you're watching this, you are the custodian now. And if the countdown resumes, you must finish what I couldn't. The feed cut out. Claire stared at the screen. A loading icon spun for a moment, then froze. The file had ended. But then from across the depot came a click. Soft, mechanical. She turned in her seat. One of the old monitors on the switchboard had lit up again. No command. No input. Just green text blinking on the screen. Countdown resumed. System override. Locked. Time remaining. 47 hours, 3 minutes, and 29 seconds. She didn't scream, but her heart did. Claire stared at the blinking screen, the countdown pulsing like a heartbeat in fluorescent green. 47 hours, 3 minutes, 29 seconds. She read the numbers once, twice, hoping they'd vanish, hoping it was a glitch. But they didn't. They ticked downward, steady and certain. She rose from the chair in one slow motion, the room around her suddenly too quiet, too still. The kind of stillness that didn't comfort, it warned. Something had changed, not just in the system, in the facility itself. Like the air had turned and noticed her. She grabbed her satchel and the flash drive, shoving them both inside. The custodian's letter, the printouts, everything she'd pulled, all of it jammed into a single file folder. She moved fast, not frantic, but focused, a mechanic in crisis mode, because she finally understood. This wasn't a vault designed to stay sealed forever. It was designed to stay sealed just long enough, until someone either rearmed it or stopped it. She returned to panel Delta, the same small rusted hatch she'd cranked open to access the vault, and this time she checked the frame. Alston had said the final step was handwritten. She didn't see anything on the surface, but when she ran her fingers along the inner edge, something shifted. A thin metal sheet, magnetic, hidden just beneath the top lip. She peeled it off. Behind it, taped to the frame with military-issued duct tape, was a folded slip of paper. Yellowed, corners curled. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Final override. 8117 Delta Raven lock. Must be entered in main terminal. Do not partially execute. Beneath the text, a signature. Lieutenant R. Alston. Claire committed the code to memory, then folded the paper neatly and slipped it into her jacket. It felt too small to be this powerful, this final. But she knew what it meant now. There was no chain of command. No recovery team. The moment that countdown began, whoever was inside the facility became the failsafe. And she was inside. She headed back through the corridor. The lights above her flickered less, now steadier. As if the facility itself had finally admitted she was real and accepted her as part of its system. The silence was gone too, replaced with a low, rhythmic hum. Some part of the reactor system had spun up in the last hour. Maybe just backup batteries. Maybe something else. She paused just outside the control center, resting her hand against the wall. Cool to the touch, but no longer cold. The temperature across the depot had risen by 3 degrees. Claire stepped back inside and stared at the main terminal. The screen still pulsed. Time remaining: 46 hours, 42 minutes, and 17 seconds. She whispered, not to herself, but to Alston, or whoever had come before. "I've got the key." Then she sat down, cracked her knuckles, and began entering the code. She didn't know if it would shut the vault forever, or open something that had been locked away for a reason. The keys clicked louder than they should have. Each letter and number echoed through the control room like a nail driven into something ancient. Claire's fingers hesitated over every entry, double-checked, triple-checked, because one wrong command could trigger the exact opposite of what she meant to do. The terminal's cursor blinked like a heartbeat, waiting. She inhaled once, slowly, then began. 8, 1, 1, 7, Delta, Raven, lock. The screen flashed. The text dissolved. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the terminal buzzed, not violently, not even loudly, just a soft, undeniable vibration that traveled through the desk into her elbows. A new message appeared. Final override code accepted. Manual confirmation required. Caution. This action cannot be undone. Claire's throat tightened. She reached for the old rotary-style selector switch mounted beneath the terminal, an ancient piece of hardware labeled simply, "Execute divided by abort." The switch was stiff. She had to press hard to turn it, the gears inside reluctant to move, not because of age, she thought, but because no one ever had. No one had ever come this far. That idea alone made her hand pause in midair. She looked around the room. The lights overhead had stabilized. The blinking had stopped. The entire depot was now running on full backup systems, all of them activated by her movements over the last 24 hours. The place had taken her presence as permission, and yet, that same silence now felt like a question. What if this isn't a vault at all? What if it's a cage? And what if what's inside was never meant to be saved? Her mind flashed back to Alston's face on the video. The exhaustion, the uncertainty, his warning. Sometimes it's my breathing. Sometimes I don't think it is. Claire placed her hand on the selector switch, paused, then turned it hard to the left. Execute. The screen dimmed. The lights in the control room flickered once, then steadied. Across the facility, mechanical clunks and deep metallic groans rolled like thunder through the concrete walls. Somewhere below, massive doors were shifting. Pressure valves hissed. Steam vents exhaled. And then the terminal lit back up. Vault override initiated. Stasis lock deactivated. Full. Environmental system reset. Final lockdown. In 59 to 0 minutes. Claire blinked. Final lockdown? That hadn't been in the notes. Not in Alston's file. Not on any screen. The system hadn't just accepted her code. It had started a new sequence. One last window to seal the facility permanently before it changed. Before whatever was in Vault 3B became active in ways no one had ever dared document. Claire stood, backing away from the terminal. The vault wasn't opening. It was waking up. And now, she had 59 minutes to decide whether to finish what they started or seal it forever. The siren didn't sound like she expected. No screaming klaxon, no flashing red lights. Just a steady, low tone pulsing once every 10 seconds like a reminder, like a heartbeat counting down. Claire moved fast, not out of panic, but precision. Her mind had shifted into that mechanic's gear, the one she slipped into when an engine block cracked mid-repair or when the weld on a pressure line hissed like a warning. Focus. No room for fear. She ran back down the corridor toward Vault 3B, the heat already building in the air like a rising fever. The walls hummed. When she reached the vault, the pressure door was already partway open, not wide, just enough to reveal the same grating path she'd walked before. But now, a soft glow spilled out from within. It wasn't just light. It had movement, pulse, the kind of glow you couldn't explain not from filament bulbs or LED indicators. It was alive, and it was growing. Claire gritted her teeth, pulled on her gloves, and stepped inside. The missile stood exactly where she'd left it, unchanged, untouched. But now its surface shimmered faintly with what looked like condensation, or maybe heat distortion. Her boots clanged against the metal grating as she descended the ladder. The console at the bottom was active again, same screen, same keys, but new commands now glowed on the interface. Primary containment. Override complete. Secondary lockdown. In 43 to 27. Option. Reseal, divided by complete wake sequence. Claire stared at the screen. Wake sequence. That's what this was. Whatever Harrow was, it had been left in stasis for 34 years, and now, because of her, it was reawakening. She placed her hands on the edge of the console and tried to steady her breath. Alston had fought to keep this place closed. Everyone had walked away from it, or died with the secrets buried in concrete. So why had they left it all active? Why install a countdown instead of a kill switch? Why put all of it, this vault, this knowledge, this decision, into the hands of anyone? Unless that was the point. Not just to preserve the threat, but to force someone to face it. Claire's hand hovered over the keyboard. She remembered the heat signature, the breathing, the red ink on Alston's message. If the heat rises, walk away. But she hadn't. She was here, and the heat was rising. Claire typed, command. Reseal vault. Status. Override confirmation required. She pulled the slip of paper from her jacket, the same code that had opened everything, and entered it one last time. The terminal paused, then responded, containment lockdown. Confirmed. Sealing in progress. I do not interrupt. Above her, the vault door began to close. Slow. Reluctant. Final. The hum in the air shifted less alive now, more dormant, as if the facility were exhaling one last time. Claire stood in silence, the heat receding from her skin, the lights dimming back to their faded hum. The last command had been entered. The decision made. She had shut the vault, not out of fear, but because some things weren't meant to wake. It was quiet again. Not dead, never that, but settled. The way the earth feels after a storm moves through. Claire sat alone on the concrete stoop outside the depot, arms resting on her knees, jacket dusted in rust, sweat dried to salt along her collar. The sun was setting low over the Kansas plains, casting long gold shadows across the grass. The vault was sealed now, fully, permanently. She'd watched the final locks engage on the terminal herself, listened as the pressure equalized, the chamber purged, and the final override erased itself from the system. The screen had gone dark. The hum had faded. The breathing had stopped. Whatever Harrow was, it was back in stasis. Not erased, not destroyed, contained. She hadn't told anyone, not the sheriff in the nearest town, not the county office, not the Department of Energy number the man in the truck had given her, the one she'd quietly deleted the night before. Somehow, Claire knew this wasn't a story that would survive translation. She hadn't closed the vault for the world. She'd closed it for the next person who might come wandering in, chasing a dream or trying to make rent, and finding something they were never meant to wake. 2 weeks later, she returned with a lockbox and a fresh coat of paint, welded the outer blast doors shut, added signage. Danger. Environmental hazard, restricted property. Not technically a lie. Not technically legal either. But no one came to check. No one ever had. And Claire stayed. She set up a small trailer beside the depot, solar rig on the roof, workbench out front. Started taking on mechanical work from the next town over farm equipment, old trucks, welding projects. Word spread slowly. That girl at the old base knows her stuff. Nobody asked what was inside, and she never volunteered it. But every so often, someone would show up curious, usually young, usually men, usually holding a printout of an old Craigslist ad that had somehow resurfaced. Claire would meet them at the gate, tell them it had been sold years ago, that there was nothing inside, that it wasn't safe. Most turned around. One asked what really happened there. She just smiled and said, "It's not a place you want to go, unless you're already carrying something heavy." And that was the truth. The vault never fully left her. Sometimes at night, she'd dream of the hum again, the countdown, the low, pulsing light beneath the floor. But in the dreams, it was always sealed, always waiting. And she was standing guard, not afraid anymore, just aware. She wasn't a mechanic in a dusty garage now. She was the keeper of a silence too big to name. And somehow, that felt right. Because not every story needs to be told. Some need to be carried. And Claire Jensen would carry this one rust, concrete, silence, and all, for the rest of her life.